Hello there, from wherever you are watching us from. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us. This is the 1st of July, 2021, the second day of the Generation Equality Forum. And today's session is titled Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition Session. We really hope the next few hours are going to be exciting, are going to be informative. This forum is a landmark moment, 26 years after the Beijing Women's Declaration. And this is about making commitments, especially to end another shadow pandemic, gender-based violence. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists. We're also going to be hearing from leaders who are going to be sharing their own commitments on the same. And we'll be using the live chat as an interactive space, and we encourage you to submit comments as well. My name is Janet Mbogwa. I'm a moderator. I am the founder of Inua Dada Foundation, author, amplifier, mother of two, very passionate about gender issues. And so we are going to get right into the program. We're going to start off by taking a look at a video, and there'll be several throughout this session, incredible rich videos with various voices and various moments, really shedding light again on this landmark moment and taking us through the various calls to action with regards to addressing gender-based violence, because as I like to say, people's lives depend on it. It's not just about having a summit or a forum and making commitments. We need the follow-through and accountability as well. So our first video is going to talk about a story that showcases the journey of the Generation Equality Forum so far, and then we'll get into the first few interactive sessions. Let's take a look. And so the journey continues. The Generation Equality Forum, it's been a long time coming. This was obviously supposed to happen 25 years after the Beijing Women's Conference. And unfortunately, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we did see an increase in a very large, tragic way of cases of gender-based violence escalating throughout the world. We're now going to have our first interactive session, as mentioned, and we're going to be hearing from the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, that's Arthur Regner. We'll also be hearing from Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Okay, I believe we do have the ED. I think we've got the conversation with you. Okay, so let me start off the question. Thank you for making time today and for this incredible landmark moment. Yesterday, the sentence, "From today, the world of gender equality is a changed space, and this is just the beginning," is something that was said out loud. And this really touches on a multi approach to addressing gender-based violence. Take us through how this process is different and how it's been, and also some of the priorities that are for the action coalition. So how has the multi-stakeholder process been different this time?
Are you asking me first or Linda?
I'm asking you first, ma'am.
Okay. Well, it certainly has been wonderful. I certainly am sitting with wonderful people here, all of us committed to make the change that we need now. What is different about this time is that 25 years ago, we started in a world that, for instance, did not have laws that protect women. What came out of Beijing was a blueprint that addresses many of the issues that in many countries were not protected in law. Also, it is important at this point in time because we are beginning to evaluate what we have done with all those promises that we made to women. And we recognize that we have not done as much as we needed to do. And it is for that reason that we called Generation Equality. Let me just give you some examples. The girl child was defined as a girl child for the first time in Beijing by African women who recognized that there were crimes that were committed to baby girls because they were girls. They were females genitally mutilated. They were married off because they were girls. They did not go to schools because they were girls. And they needed to be laws in countries to stop that practice. Also, at that time, many women who were married did not have any rights in their marriages. That set a whole trend of revisiting those laws and changing them. Sadly, we have not finished to change the laws that discriminate against women, but I have to say we've come a long way with changing the laws. Because, for instance, there was no jurisprudence for women. If Me Too happened 25 years ago, it would not have been the success that it was because there just would not have been enough laws to protect those women. So we have come a long way, but we definitely have a long way to go. And we see that if we move at the pace we are moving, we just are not going to get there. And that is why we are here today, because we are making the big push. Today, this conference is about the big push forward.
Very well said, the big push forward. Madam Edie, apologies. We were told that you were not going to make it to the session. We're so happy that you are here, and we're very happy of your continued push and action for change and the incredible letter you also wrote, I think, to girls some time back. So thank you once again for your passion and for saying this is the big push, because it really is a landmark moment. Thank you so much for that. Her Excellency, Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, the question for you is around the Action Coalition session is focused on GBV, which has increased in the context of COVID-19, which I mentioned, which Madam Edie mentioned as well. What do you see as the most pressing issues related to addressing GBV against women and girls in all their diversity, both in the US and abroad, and what commitments will the government of the United States of America make to address these challenges?
Good. I didn't fully hear your question, but I will attempt to give you an answer without knowing completely what the question is related to SDG against women and girls. And for me, I think the most important thing that we need to do is recognize that this is an issue. Because I think we're still living at a time when the world does not fully recognize nor understand the importance of focusing on issues related to violence against women and girls. we're seeing a situation around the world where women and girls are becoming not just the target, but they're being used as tools of war. They're being victimized in situations of war. When I look at the situation in Ethiopia and hear all of the reports of women being raped there, and I look at what we're seeing coming out of Xinjiang and women being targeted there, and the situation in Burma. And we have to recognize as we address or try and find solutions to conflict that we have to focus on what is happening to women and girls and how they are being victimized. And then finally, I would add that we have to ensure that women are at the table so that when we are trying to find or negotiate settlements to conflict, that those settlements include a recognition that women have been victimized and that women's needs have to be addressed in any solution that we come up with.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, I think you're saying that you're unable to hear me, ma'am, but I know you've mentioned that it's important that we validate women and validate the fact that they are victims or survivors of gender-based violence. And I want to thank you for those remarks. Again, for those of you who are watching us from around the world, I hope you can still hear us well. Of course, we're streaming in from all around the world. Hopefully, we can connect my sound and video very well throughout this session. We'll do our best to do that. And so we've heard from UN Women Executive Director from Zealand Harbour, and of course, Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield, United States Ambassador to the United Nations, both of whom have spoken about the importance of making this moment, as the Executive Director mentioned, a big push, and as Her Excellency Ms. Linda Thomas Greenfield mentioned, putting women and girls at the table and ensuring that we validate their experiences. Thank you both so much for the work you do and for your continued advocacy. We around the world appreciate it very much. We are continuing here now with our program on this session, and we're going to line up our next speaker today, and that's Darren Walker, President of the Ford Foundation, who made an incredible commitment to end gender-based violence. We'd now like to invite Darren Walker onto the screens to talk to us a little bit about that. Darren Walker, welcome in. We'll just give you a moment to make sure that you are very well set up and ready to answer our question. And remember, for those of you who are participating, you can use the chat box. You can send your questions and comments there, make your declarations and pledges and commitments. This session is about the Action Coalition to End Gender-Based Violence and the commitments that are going to make a massive difference in ensuring that the lives of especially women and girls are protected. Monetary commitments, especially to make sure that we are able to scale safe houses, that we're able to have economic empowerment programs that put money in the hands of survivors, giving them negotiating power and the ability to navigate their way out of trauma and hopefully into a much more hopeful and life. That's why this is important. It's not just a conversation. These are commitments meant to serve women and girls around the world. So once again, just checking whether we have Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, who will be able to answer a few questions. I will give it a few moments, and then we'll see whether we need to move on to the session. On my screen, there we go. Perfect, thank you. President of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, are you able to hear me clearly?
Indeed, I can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us and for the incredible commitment you've made. The question I'd like to ask you is, Ford Foundation has made a commitment to address gender-based violence and support women's rights organizations. Tell us about the rationale behind Ford's commitment of these areas and the role you see for women's rights organizations in the fight against gender-based violence.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here on behalf of my colleagues at the Ford Foundation to discuss a most important issue, our commitment of over $260 million in the areas, of course, of gender-based violence and building the infrastructure for women's rights organizations is of the utmost importance. And it's important because if we are to address the issues of gender-based violence, we have to focus on the infrastructure of women-led organizations, grassroots organizations, to have the resources to be resilient in the face of the obstacles and challenges that they face. These funds need to be unrestricted. They need to provide technical support. We believe that we must not only address the issues of services to victims, we must address the issues of prevention. We cannot address prevention without addressing the driver here, which is patriarchy. It is patriarchy, it is power and control of the bodies and minds and spirits of women and girls. And so we believe at Ford that if we invest in this infrastructure to fight this scourge of gender-based violence, we can actually see material improvement. But that is only going to happen when the paradigm for philanthropy, for donors, for development agencies shifts to recognize the centrality of women-led grassroots organizations. If we are to make good on our rhetoric of funding those closest to the problem, or acknowledging that those who are most proximate are able to unleash the solutions, then we have to fund them. We have to fund them like we believe it. And that's going to mean changing our behavior. We talk a lot about the behavior that needs to change in communities. What about the behavior that needs to change on the part of foundations, development organizations, donors? We need to change and recognize that there is expert wisdom and knowledge in grassroots organizations, that the people who are closest and most proximate genuinely, authentically do hold the solutions. So we need to create the mechanisms that provide them with the kind of capital, multi-year, longer term, that makes it possible for these organizations to dream, to have the luxury of dreaming, of strategic planning, of technical assistance, the luxuries that organizations around the world have, but often grassroots organizations in places like Africa, India, Latin America, and other parts of the global South are not afforded that privilege. It's about time that we gave them the opportunity to fully have their voices heard. They've got voices. We just need to fund them so that their voices can be heard and amplified.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think you've touched on so many critical touch points, how donor funding needs to be redirected to women-led organizations at the grassroots. We talked about patriarchy, power, and control, and how we need to address those as the key drivers of gender-based violence. President of the Ford Foundation, Darren Walker, thank you for your commitment, thank you for your passion, and we look forward to following through and seeing what the Ford Foundation will be able to do to impact change on the ground. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will also introduce our next speaker. And as I mentioned there, the president of the Ford Foundation has really touched on such a critical point in terms of how we can shift the narrative, how we can shift the language, how we can check ourselves, and even check patterns of donor funding that have been practiced over the years. Our next speaker is Eileen Teresa Menchitu. He is the member of the board of directors of LNL, or Las Niñas Lideran. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. We're excited to have young voices and activists in the room. And as a young leader and activist yourself, what are the commitments that you will make for the next 5 years as members of the Coalition for Action on Gender Violence?
Buen día tenga cada uno de ustedes. Mi nombre es Eileen Menchú, soy de Guatemala y soy una líder joven activista. Represento a la red departamental Las Niñas Lideran de Quetzaltenango, Guatemala, la cual es una iniciativa de Levantemos. Y nosotras somos una red liderada por niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes líderes. Y el día de hoy, como miembro de la coalición de violencia de género y como red, nos comprometemos en estos próximos 5 años a promover acciones de incidencia política para la implementación de mejores leyes, políticas, programas y presupuestos, asegurando que gobiernos locales y nacionales inviertan y promuevan planes e iniciativas consensuadas en las necesidades más sentidas de las adolescentes y juventudes. Asimismo, sumaremos esfuerzos con redes, movimientos y aliados estratégicos de los que somos miembros a nivel local, nacional e internacional, para promover la prevención de violencia y específicamente la violencia de género. Promoveremos un lente interseccional y diverso para asegurar la amplificación de las voces de los pueblos indígenas, afrodescendientes y la población de niñas, adolescentes y jóvenes marginados. Compartiremos nuestra experiencia haciendo incidencia con herramientas de formación. Continuaremos con el trabajo de prevención de la violencia de género en sus diferentes manifestaciones, con enfoque en las escuelas y servicio psicoeducativo y ocupacional a sobrevivientes de violencia, atención, detección y derivación de casos. Este es el momento en que un adolescente y 250 millones de adolescentes alzamos nuestra voz para generar cambios y ser parte de ellos trabajando intergeneracionalmente. Muchas gracias por el apoyo y por el espacio y nos seguiremos viendo durante estos esfuerzos.
Thank you so much for that. It's I think young people like you that really give us the hope and momentum to make sure that we follow through on our commitments and initiatives. That's Eileen Teresa Menchú, who is a board director from LNL, Las Niñas Lideran, and she's talked about an intersectional approach. She's also talked about making sure that there's focus on indigenous groups and not leave them out of it. And so people like Eileen are essentially at the front lines for the next generation, trying to make sure that we do not overlap the same patterns of gender-based violence that we're seeing in such a tragic way around the world. We'll now move on to speaker today. Speaker is Professor Margaret, the Secretary for the Gender Ministry for the Government of Kenya. And as we await her entry into the room, the government of Kenya made very bold commitments. The president of Kenya talked about committing about $23 million to combating gender-based violence in the country, which included resourcing into training police officers, building safe houses, making sure that there's a GBV Survivors Fund, because again, as mentioned earlier, without that economic empowerment, then the cycle continues to perpetuate in many ways. That's also something that Darren Walker alluded to earlier on. Do we have Professor Margaret Kobia so that we can then engage in an interactive session with her? We'll give her a few minutes.
Jude, I can hear you, but I'm not coming on the screen. Jude, I can hear you.
The EU is a relatively good place to live for women. We strive to achieve gender equality within our borders and beyond as a matter of political priority. This is why the European Commission took a leading role in the Generation Equality Forum across the action coalitions. We dedicate our efforts, and particularly as co-leaders of the Action Coalition, on gender-based violence. Combating gender-based violence is one of the strategic objectives of this Commission. So we will contribute to the success of the Generation Equality Forum by implementing game-changing commitments to build long-term improvements in the lives of women and girls in the EU and around the world. In the coming 7 years, the Commission pledges €190 million for actions preventing and combating all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls and domestic violence in the EU, including by promoting the standards laid down in the Istanbul Convention. We will fund projects by grassroots organizations to raise awareness and disseminate knowledge on gender-based violence while providing support and protection to victims. Our assistance goes to actions that tackle all forms of violence, including domestic violence, sexual violence, trafficking in human beings, stalking, female genital mutilation and other harmful practices, as well as online violence and harassment. To track expenditure on gender equality, including gender-based violence at program level, the Commission is developing a methodology to improve gender mainstreaming in our budget process. This will further increase the contribution made by policy design and resource allocation to gender equality objectives. Our commitment to tackle gender-based violence goes beyond the financial pledges. By the end of the year, we will present a legislative proposal to prevent and combat gender-based violence by setting minimum standards that will apply to all EU member states. This legislative initiative will ensure that our member states have effective measures in place to prevent and combat violence against women and domestic violence. Because we all need to invest, build and improve our responses to prevent violence and support and protect the survivors.
The rise in domestic violence is a shadow pandemic. It demands global action. As Helena said, the European Commission is committed to leading the Action Coalition on gender-based violence. We advance gender equality in our work. At least 85% of all our external actions under our new Gender Action Plan will contribute to gender equality and women's empowerment. A minimum of 5% will have gender equality as main objective. We push to have at least 20% of new actions on public finance management reforms with a gender budgeting perspective. And we will increase funding for women's organizations. But we can only inspire change by coming together. The best example is the EU-UN Spotlight initiative. It puts survivors first. It empowers civil society and promotes institutional strengthening and legislative reforms. The initiative engages with men and boys and provides good practices to drive global policy. It delivers impressive results already in 26 countries and 6 regions. I call on all partners today to join the initiative to end gender-based violence. Through the Spotlight initiative, we will be launching the global platform. It is a knowledge hub, community of practice and advocacy platform in the true spirit of generation equality. We have the political commitment, we have the vehicle, and we have the tools. So let's come together as partners for a world without gender-based violence.
Thank you for your question. Dear colleagues, let me start off by saying that Iceland is honored to co-lead the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. We are committed to contribute with ambitious actions to achieve real progress both at home and abroad. I commend the leadership of UN Women and the governments of France and Mexico in the Generation Equality Forum. This is a very important initiative which gives us the opportunity to join forces with multiple stakeholders and work in partnership towards innovative actions to make a lasting change. The global community is faced with the enormous task of building back better after the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we have seen a surge in gender-based violence, and emerging threats such as digital violence and sexist hate speech online have been more prevalent in our societies. In stark contrast with this reality is the revelation and power of the Me Too movement. Women continue to speak up about violence and sexual harassment they face, and this wave of the women's movement has raised social recognition and public awareness of the extent of gender-based violence. Iceland's leadership framework in the Generation Equality Forum outlines 23 commitments to ending all forms of gender-based violence and sexual violence as a prerequisite for achieving gender equality. We also support collective commitments of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence. Iceland emphasizes the need to increase support for women's rights organizations, to improve service delivery for victim survivors, and their access to justice. We will double core contributions to UNFPA to support flexible funding for sexual and reproductive health services to those most in need, including cases of sexual and gender-based violence in crisis situations. Iceland will also continue to engage men and boys in all gender equality initiatives, and we jointly commit with UN Women to enhance work in transforming harmful masculinities. Iceland will support UN Women in this area with a financial contribution of $1 million over 2 years. Iceland will further strengthen its legal and policy framework addressing gender-based violence, which has undergone a comprehensive review throughout the last decade. This review has led to fundamental amendments to the General Penal Code, as well as legislative changes, for example, in response to the realities of digital forms of sexual abuse and violence. The changes we have made have drastically improved procedures of investigations and led to a more open discussion about all forms of gender-based violence. The global community now has the unique opportunity to bring the messages of survivors of gender-based violence to the center of international cooperation, away from the periphery where it too often resides. By doing so, I believe we can fully implement the commitments made in Beijing in 1995 and reach the targets of SDG number 5. Thank you.
I would see in the media a tall, blonde woman with light blue eyes, but I'm not like that at all. I'm very short, my hair curls, I have brown eyes. I can be a Dominican American and go braless and have natural hair and be these thousands of things because that's just who I am.
As a teenager, it can be really hard. We have these pressures and these expectations, but at the end of the day, whatever's best for me, I'm gonna do.
I'm not a man and I'm not a woman. I am something completely different.
Our stories need to be heard, and representation matters within the media.
Gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation and race and class, those things tangle with each other and they dance and sum up who I am.
It's really special to have a space to speak out.
So incredible. I don't know that we've ever had a more diverse and inclusive generation. If you're watching this and you feel like your voice was reflected in that last video, give yourself a pat on the back. You are celebrated and you belong, and your voices do need to be heard. And previously, we also heard videos from Commissioners Dali and Urpilainen of the European Commission, and Her Excellency Katrin Jacobsdottir, Prime Minister of Iceland, all of whom are committing in a very big way to ending gender-based violence in their country. We're back, and thank you for those of you who are streaming from around the world. I hope you're staying with us and using the chat box to share your thoughts and comments on this very important conversation in the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition session. We're now going to go into another interactive, engaging session, and first up, I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Susanna Jacob, Deputy Director General of the World Health Organization, And I'll be directing my first question to you to ask, WHO has highlighted the importance of maintaining services for survivors of GBV as essential services during COVID-19. What will the World Health Organization prioritize to ensure access to quality, comprehensive, survivor-centered GBV services? Are you hearing me clearly? If you can hear me, you can give me a cue. I can repeat the question. And the question is, WHO has highlighted the importance of maintaining services for survivors of gender-based violence as essential services.
No.
What will the World
Nothing.
Health Organization prioritize to ensure access to quality, comprehensive, survivor-centered services? I believe some of our participants are struggling to hear me, unfortunately. I believe some of our panelists are struggling to hear me. I might perhaps have to move on to the next speaker as we try and come back to the World Health Organization, if that's okay, just so that we're able to try and engage some of the other panelists as the sound is sorted in some of the different fronts. Marie-Claire Devou, the Chief Sustainability Officer, Head of International Institutional Caring Foundation, if you're with us on the screen, I'd like to direct the next question to you. Right. Thank you. And you can hear me well? Okay, great. All right, I'll ask the question. I know that we are unfortunately struggling a little bit with sound from across the board.
We can't hear you.
We are going to need a little bit of assistance on the tech front, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to need a little bit. Can you hear me all? Can you hear me all?
Now, yes.
Okay. I had a question for the... Nope. Can't hear. Okay. If I can ask that perhaps we go into another short video, because I do not know that the panelists are able to hear me. So far, two have said they can't, and I can't hear them either.
Now we can hear you.
The back-end team to go into the video. Yes.
I can hear you actually. Rida from Beirut.
यहाँ लड़कियों की कीमतों पे बोली लगती है, क्या हम रोज छेड़छाड़ केस होते हैं, क्या गलती है मेरी, दिल्ली में रोज 6 से ज्यादा रेप होते हैं।
क्यों समाज ने मुझको दबाया है, बिना खुद को सुधारे मुझे घर में बिठाया है। निर्भया फूलन देवी बिल के, क्या वो नन्ही सी लड़की याद रहेगी उन्हें सबकी कहानी। नए दिन हो गए हैं, आसमां में तारीख हो गए हैं, तारीख पे तारीख, इंसाफ की ड्यूटी से पुलिस भी है फारिग। मैं पंख फैलाना चाहती हूँ जिंदा दिल और बेखौफ, मैं खुलकर जीना चाहती हूँ, मैं खुलकर जीना चाहती हूँ। ओ दिल्ली जरा अपना दिल तो खोल, ओ दिल्ली जरा अपना दिल तो खोल, नारी शक्ति है अनमोल अनमोल, मन की बातें बहना तू भी बोल, तू भी बोल। More power to you, sister. More power to you. More power to you, sister. More power to you. More power to you, sister. More power to you. More power to you, sister.
We come together as a coalition that offers real hope to women and girls in our own countries and around the world. Because sadly, experience suggests that ending gender-based violence and realising gender equality will require a concerted effort from all sectors of society for many years to come. Through this process, we have come together and written not just one, but 6 blueprints for that work. And I would like to thank everyone who has worked with us on the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, our colleagues from the governments of Kenya, Iceland and Uruguay, and from civil society, the private sector and international organisations. In support of this ambitious roadmap, the UK will scale up our What Works to Prevent Violence programme, implementing approaches to prevention that are proven to work, and putting evidence about the prevalence, nature and drivers of this violence at the centre of the global response. It will pioneer new solutions in areas where evidence has previously been lacking, such as conflict settings and for marginalised groups. We will also continue to use our diplomatic influence and our overseas development assistance to support women's rights organisations, to increase prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence, and to safeguard against sexual exploitation, abuse and harassment in the aid industry. And we continue to champion and support 12 years of quality education for all girls, which can help bridge the gender gap and reduce violence. Of course, this coalition is about action at home as much as it is about helping each other internationally. For as long as gender-based violence exists in the UK, our government will work to end it. We have enacted new laws that incorporate emotional and economic abuse into the definition of domestic abuse and recognise the impact of abuse on children. We have also committed to publish and implement new strategies to tackle violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, which will strengthen measures to target perpetrators and will put victims and survivors at the heart of our approach. Our collective goal must be to do all we can at home and overseas to eradicate gender-based violence. This coalition can be a game changer for women and girls everywhere. So I hope you share my optimism that we have taken a step closer towards that goal today.
En virtud del histórico compromiso de nuestro país en materia de género, Uruguay asumió el liderazgo de la coalición sobre violencia de género.
We have taken the leadership of the coalition in the fight against gender-based violence. Uruguay is really a major defender of gender equality and is working to achieve full recognition of human rights for women and girls in their full diversity. The government has the fight against violence and against women in particular is a key challenge and wishes to roll out government efforts to remove gender-based violence. This is why I'm pleased to set out Uruguay's commitments for the next 4 years until 24 as part of the 4 main initiatives, which are the working policies of the coalitions as regards the effort aimed at creating a legal environment enabling the elimination of gender-based violence. Uruguay pledges to implement, follow, monitor the national plan against gender-based violence 2021-2024, which will be an institutional program as part of the law enacted in 1980, violence against women, and incorporate the intersectional perspective, providing care for victims, prosecuting perpetrators and restoring rights. The law will also be implemented in the field of education. There'll be a follow-up of that law through a specific follow-up measure of the Observatory Against Gender-Based Violence as regards the effort aimed at enhancing and increasing strategies based on evidence-based initiatives in the fight against gender-based violence. Uruguay commits to putting in place an interinstitutional cross-cutting strategy as part of its 2021-24 plan that I mentioned earlier. Lastly, Uruguay is indeed committing to eliminate gender-based violence in its full diversity in the working context. I'd like to acknowledge all the participants of the forum and reaffirm that Uruguay is fully committed to this fight against gender-based violence. Thank you.
Bonjour, I'm Sébastien Bazin. I'm the chairman and CEO of ACOR. And I first want to thank the French government, the United Nations for Women, and all the members of Generation Equality. I know how much you've been working endless hours to prepare that forum in Paris on the 30th of June and today on the 1st of July. I need to tell you how important the subject we're going to be describing is for ACOR. We have been making major commitments on gender equality, and we have achieved those targets, which were audacious at the time. We're making another commitment as a leader of another initiative as important as the last one, which is gender-based violence. But I'm not making it on my own. We've been discussing it at the executive committee level. We've been having validation at the board of ACOR on December 2020. And of course, that commitment will be deployed over 110 countries, 5,200 hotels, 270,000 employees, of which 43% are women. And I was flabbergasted when I've been hearing 7 months ago that 80% of women in the private sectors have been either witnessing or have been impacted by gender-based violence. This is something that no one could accept. So in order to tackle it, in order to make sure that that 80% number will be less than 10% in the years ahead, you need a methodology. You need to be grounded on the ground. You need to give reason for people to fight, which means you have to go in different sequence. The first of it, whomever is going to be impacted by it, just make sure that that person will be talking about it. So awareness is absolutely critical. Then you need to sensibilize people how important that topic is, which is unbearable. Then you need to prevent those things from happening. And then you need to protect those people who are being victims of it. And you need the men and women to be embarked in doing it over the 110 countries of this extraordinary company. But I want to finish with telling you that if you want to be successful, you have to have a set of priorities. And for our core, our scope is of 3 words: sexism, sexual harassment, and domestic violence. At the end of the day, what I want is to make sure that the working environment of our core, wherever they sit, whether it is in any headquarters or any hotels on this planet, people, women feel safe and protected. And for this, I'm never going to be able to achieve it alone, neither myself or our core as a large organization. I want to be very thankful, and I want to thank for being so privileged to be part of that coalition. By acting together, by sharing best practices, by learning from the mistake we could have made over the past few years, we're going to be so much stronger, so much better. So I am thankful, honored, and so happy to be a participant, and count on me. Results will be there. Merci beaucoup. Bye-bye.
Count on me, results will be there. Thank you again for staying with us in this session. We will soldier on. It is a global event happening virtually and physically, and so therefore we will try to do it as best as we can. So thank you so much for staying with us. That was, as mentioned, Sebastian Bazan. There was Lucas Arimondo, Vice President in Uruguay, and of course Minister Wendy Morton, Minister for European Neighborhood and Americas from the United Kingdom, all of whom made commitments on video, and before that the incredible Kadarki Latvian rap group, from young girls who are using that as a way to navigate some of the issues they face. We continue now with our interactive session, and at this point I would like to welcome Professor Margaret Kobi, Cabinet Secretary from the Republic of Kenya, who will talk to us a little bit about the commitments made by President Kenyatta and by her ministry in addressing gender-based violence. I can see her now there. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Margaret Kobi, as you settled in. And as mentioned earlier, we heard, of course, about the commitments that President Kenyatta made. Bold ones, $23 million US dollars invested in addressing gender-based violence in the country. And we just wanted to hear from you, what are the major commitments that Kenya has made to increase the global momentum towards ending all forms of gender-based violence? And most importantly, Professor, what will it take to deliver on them?
I thank you for giving the Kenya government an opportunity to take part in this meeting of Action Coalition and leaders for commitment makers. The innovative financial and political commitment will hasten the pace of achieving a more equal, inclusive one where women and men have equal opportunities. As one of the coalition leaders, Generation Equality Forum presents the Kenyan government with a platform to recommit to ending all forms of gender violence, including harmful practices. Kenyan government, the Kenya Generation Equality Commitment builds on a significant gains that we have made since the adoption of the Beijing Platform of Action. Our commitments are aligned with the country's commitment that we have made during the 25th anniversary of the International Conference of Population and Development ICCD plus 25 in November, that was hosted in Kenya in 2019. Therefore, it is now my pleasure to share the government Kenya commitment that we have made and we consider critical to accelerating the momentum towards ending gender-based violence. And I'm also happy to be joined by the other 4 countries, UK, Uruguay, Iceland, and Kenya. The commitments are made which are very well thought out as a government because we are getting the political commitment of the leadership with His Excellency the President who was here in person. One, we are committed to full implementation of gender-based violence laws and the policies that we have already done in Kenya. We will also ratify and implement the ILO Convention 190 by 2026. We are investing $23 million for gender-based violence prevention and response by 2022 and increase the response allocation up to $50 million through core financing model because this is what is new in this particular new initiative. We are not going to find just a government, we are working with civil society, development partner, through remote action initiative. We will invest $1 million annually to gender-based violence, research and innovation to boost evidence-based programming. We are also establishing a gender-based violence survival fund. We are also committed to integrating gender-based services such as medical, legal, psychological support to all the essential minimum package of universal health coverage. We are also scaling up the National Police Service, integrated response to gender-based violence, and also gender-based violence recovery centers in our 47 counties. We also commit to develop a gender-based violence management information system so that we can be able to track data and communicate better. We also want to introduce a module in gender-based violence in the 2022 Kenya Demographic Health Survey to strengthen our utilization of gender statistics in informing design, scale-up, and the evaluation of FGM and the GBV programming. And lastly, we want to institutionalize the multi-sectoral Generation Equality Forum leadership structure to guide the implementation of Kenya Generation Equality of GBV Action Coalition. Excellencies, you also agree with me, Kenya has indeed made concrete commitments that will impact on millions of women and girls affected by GBV. Under his leadership of His Excellency the President, who attended this particular forum, he has given us all his commitment and brought the whole of government approach to investing in this GBV. Lastly, Excellencies, we also find it equally important to delivering the commitment is not just about financing, but having an accountability framework for the implementation and also being able to track results and make a real difference. We are committed to implementing and be held accountable as a government on this gender-based violence commitment. I thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Professor Margaret Kobia from the Government of Kenya, talking there lastly about an accountability framework, which is essentially what everyone is asking for out of the Generation Equality Forum. Beyond Paris, beyond the commitment, what about the accountability? And so we thank you for those commitments and for outlining the various ways in which the Government of Kenya entails and really hopes to improve the situation on the ground and address gender-based violence as well. Right, now earlier on, we were trying to have a conversation with the World Health Organization and a few other distinguished guests, and we'd like to now bring them back on and speak to our representative from the World Health Organization. All right, so we have there, thank you so much for staying with us, Dr. Susanna Jacob, Deputy Director General for the World Health Organization. And my question to you, Doctor, is that the World Health Organization has highlighted the importance of maintaining services for survivors of gender-based violence as essential services during COVID-19. What will the World Health Organization prioritize to ensure access to quality, comprehensive, and survivor-centered GBV services? I hope you can hear me now, ma'am. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I hear you very well, and I hope you can also hear me. And thank you very much for this excellent question. Let me say that violence against women and girls is a major challenge for the societies, economies, and health systems across the world. Last year, WHO released data showing that nearly a third of women are subjected to physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has likely increased these numbers as a result of lockdowns and limited access to services. The global reality of gender-based violence The global reality of gender-based violence is shocking and unacceptable. We stand in solidarity with all women and girls who have experienced violence. WHO recognizes the critical role of the health sector in preventing and caring for those subjected to these abuses. Today we will share with you some of the WHO priorities for the coming years. First, we will work with countries to strengthen their health systems to respond more effectively to violence against women and girls. As part of this, we will establish a database to track how countries are addressing violence against women in their health policies. Second, the new WHO Academy will deploy a new course for health providers, policymakers and managers on prevention and response to violence against women. Third, WHO will work with partners to support the scale-up of prevention strategies guided by the Respect Framework in at least 25 countries with high prevalence of violence against women and girls. WHO recognizes also that gender-based violence is not just prevalent in domestic situations, it is also a problem in many workplaces. This includes in the health sector, where women make up a majority of the workforce, but only a fraction of the leadership. As part of the Gender Equal Health and Care Workforce Initiative, WHO will strengthen the implementation of the International Labour Organization's Convention 190 on protection from sexual harassment and abuse in the workplace. Within WHO, we are committed to train our staff to fully implement our new policy on preventing and addressing abusive conduct with the aim of creating a zero-tolerance workplace. Finally, I will leave you all with 3 calls to action. We call on member states to allocate resources for women and girls affected by violence in their essential services. We call on health professionals to educate themselves to provide an empathetic, non-judgmental, and ultimately more effective response. And we call on all of you to support women and girls in your communities, to stay safe and to challenge the social and cultural norms that perpetuate such violence. Women and girls, no matter where they are, deserve a life free of violence and coercion. Working together, we can build a safer, healthier, and equal world for all. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, moderator.
All right. Thank you so much for that. That was, of course, Dr. Susanna Jacob, the Deputy Director General for the World Health Organization. Those last points, they're very critical about empathy when addressing the needs of people who have been affected by gender-based violence and making sure that essential services are working for everyone on the ground, especially women and girls who are affected. We now move to an organization that has been helping survivors over a decade, in fact, over the last 13 years. That's the Caring Group. And we have Marie-Claire Deveau, the Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of International Institutional Affairs. I hope you can hear me. And as you make your way into the room, the Caring Group has been pioneering in combating violence and supporting survivors for the last 13 years through its foundation. I can see a very emphatic yes. Thankfully, now we can all hear each other. Marie-Claire, again, thank you for all the work the organization has done. 13 years of combating, gender-based violence. How then will you strengthen your action to accelerate progress on GBV?
The speaker hasn't turned on her mic. The speaker hasn't turned on her mic. The interpreter repeats, the speaker hasn't turned on her mic.
Can I ask you to please turn on your microphone, Madam Marie-Claire? If your microphone is, we cannot hear you. I think your microphone might still be off. Is it on? Your microphone is on. Okay. So
the interpreters cannot hear the speaker.
Okay. Unfortunately, Marie-Claire, the interpreters are unable to hear you. You are saying your microphone is on. Apologies. Please bear with us. I'm sure it's frustrating, but we're trying our best to see if we can tackle this issue.
The interpreters still cannot hear the speaker.
Unfortunately, Marie, we're unable to hear you, and the interpreters are unable to hear you as well. Sincere apologies. Please bear with us. I think the team behind the scenes will try to see how best they can work out. Perhaps coming back to you or trying to see if we can help you with tech support as well, Marie-Claire. Once again, I'm really sorry for this. Okay, so as we wait to hear from Marie-Claire, and as we wait to move on to our next speaker, a recap so far, we've heard a lot of commitments from various leaders from different organizations and different countries as well. This is the gender-based violence action session. So essentially, people who are committing to ending gender-based violence, outlining their monetary commitments by country and organization, outlining how they're going to implement the disbursement of this money, and more importantly, the accountability mechanisms that they're going to put in place. Because beyond this forum, the pressure is on for results, for accountability, for follow-through. This is indeed a landmark moment, but let's move beyond the conversations and move to action. That's essentially the spirit of this session over the last day and even going into today. We are going to try very hard to hear from Marie-Claire again, because I think it's important that we understand how an organization that's already been combating GBV for so many years plans to progress the action that they're taking on the ground. And perhaps now, with the support of the tech team behind the scenes, if it's time to welcome Tina Maposa into the room, I'm hoping that she is ready. Again, bear with us. This is the new normal, ladies and gentlemen, and so we're trying our best to do this hybrid event, so bear with us. Tina Maposa is with Yahweh, and she's going to talk about the civic and social programs aspect of the event. Do we have Tina in the room? We don't seem to have more speakers. As we're waiting, perhaps we can move on. If Kylie Sophia is not available, or Sohini Bhattacharya Gida Anani, we will be speaking to who is available next. We understand Tina is not here. We have Kylie Sophia Alain Orantes. I hope I said your name correctly. And I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. And of course, I'll introduce you a little bit, Kylie, before we get into a little bit of a question for you. But you are a young grassroots leader of Damayan Maralitang. This is, I believe, in the Philippines. And you have joined many activities to raise awareness. So tell us a little bit more about becoming the fight to end gender-based violence.
Hello everyone. My name is Kyle Sophia Alain A. Orantes. I am a grassroots youth leader and an advocate of addressing sexual harassment in public spaces or SHIPs in the Philippines. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to amplify that we need safe public spaces and human settlements for women and girls. If they are safe for us, these spaces will be safe for all. I joined Safe Cities Youth Theater Advocacy Group, SciTAC, in 2014 when I was 14 years old. It was our first project with DAMPA in partnership with UN Women and Quezon City Government, which is called Safe Cities Metro Manila Program. DAMPA is a member of WIRO Commission. We perform in different barangays in Metro Manila to provide awareness about how sexual harassment in public spaces affect women, girls, and the LGBTQ+. Street harassment is real. It affects women in many ways. Our decision in choosing which mode of transport to use, apart from feeling degraded, it brings trauma and fear. It also hampers our productivity, time, and income opportunities. Sexual harassment and violence against women and girls should be stopped. Our advocacy is to create safe cities and spaces for women, girls, and the LGBTQ+. Our universal right to safety, personal autonomy, respect, and dignity, it is everyone's responsibility. I volunteered my clothes as one of the victims of sexual harassment in public spaces in one of the UN Women Country Office nationwide campaigns dubbed as #Respeto naman, or in English, please respect. That future Don't Tell Me How to Dress exhibit, which displayed the clothes worn by survivors when they were sexually harassed or assaulted. Women are often blamed when they are harassed. They are accused of provoking men by clothes they wear. This is not true. Women and men have the right and free to wear what they want. We will no longer stay silent. This culture of violence and abuse against women and girls has to end. Today, I am actively involved in the voters' registration and education activities, urging youth and new voters to register their vote. As active voters, we can demand policy change and commitment for our legislators for gender-responsive policies and their implementation. In the Philippines, we have the Republic Act 11313 that defines GBV in public spaces. We were involved in the advocacy process of its enactment. Women and girls face many GBV challenges during the pandemic. We want the post-COVID-19 recovery policies, programs, and resources to be inclusive and position women and girls as active stakeholders, agents of change, including the designing and planning processes for safe, public, and shared spaces. We, grassroots women and girls, the experts and your trusted partners on the ground are committed to continue our organizing and advocacy to end gender-based violence. Thank you.
For your bold words, that's Hailey Sofia Alen Orantes. Apologies for the name scrap below her name, talking about mainstreaming women and girls from the grassroots in policy implementation when it comes to addressing gender-based violence. And as we said, if anything, this forum is a way to pound on to the next generation. They are bold, unapologetic, and ready to take action to end GBV. So thank you, Kylie, and all of your other peers who are in this fight alongside the rest of us. Our next speaker now is Gida Anani. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me, Gida, founder and director. Are you able to hear me well, Gida?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for your patience and for staying with us. And of course, you can tell us a little bit more about your organization's commitment to reinforcing criminalization of sexual and gender-based violence in all its forms and all its spaces.
Thank you. Well, today, I'm Sarah, a 14-year-old girl, survivor of incestuous rape, fearing to be killed in name of honor if I am to disclose the daily violation of my rights and body. And I'm Layla, whom her husband rapes her every night with the bless and legitimacy of Lebanese personal status code. And I'm Yara, forced into marriage legally at 9 years old and raising a child already. And I'm Dana, a refugee, raped by soldiers during the war in Syria, and being raped by the victim-blaming culture every day while I'm living in displacement and fear. Today, as the world is listening and discussing the acceleration of commitments to advance gender equality agenda and gender-based violence, women are dying inside the worst form of what war can be. War of deprivation of means of decent living, war of starvation, of violation of freedom of mobility and of living in dignity due to the greedy, corrupted system. And amidst all that, toxic patriarchy is hitting hard in its worst form, the most vulnerable groups, women and girls, in the heart of this tragedy. Today is the day of immediate action and moving to life-saving emergency interventions. While Abad renew today its commitment to end all forms of sexual violence towards women and girls in Lebanon and the MENA region, we call upon the world, governments, activists, academicians, private sectors, survivors themselves to start moving from rhetoric to action. It's time to ask ourselves, isn't it what we know about sexual violence only the top of the iceberg? Are we all playing the right and full responsible role to step up political will and tangible results? Excellencies, colleagues, it's time to assess our interventions fearlessly through the eyes of the women and girls we serve themselves. It's time we put them at the heart and the core of our survivor-centered strategies and interventions. It's time to align our legal frameworks, national legal frameworks, to our country's international, time to a strong mix for follow-up and accountability, granting a voice to those concerned. It's time to think out of the box, innovate, dare to challenge our traditional norms. As they say, we cannot reach different results if we are repeating the same methods. It's time we ensure all women survivors of sexual violence, and we're committed to that at Abad, inclusively, to have access to holistic quality services. It's time to accelerate our action and increase investment in smart and data-driven interventions. Well, in a nutshell, it's time to start investing in people rather than numbers. As Abad, we commit and continue our fight to prevent, protect, empower survivors of sexual violence in the MENA region, and reform all policies and legislations, as we did with the repealing of marrying your rapist law in Lebanon number 522. We ask you, though, today to join us in this fight, in a transformative journey where we start calculating the cost of peace rather than violence. Thank you.
Cost of peace rather than violence. Thank you for even reading those powerful letters from some of the survivors that you mentioned. We appreciate your work and we hear you. It's time to invest in people and in data-driven context as well. And it's important that we put names behind those statistics and numbers, because that's exactly what Nida was able to outline for us. The reality of so many women and girls facing violence, whether it's in the home or in different parts of the community. And she outlined some examples from violence in the home, intimate partner violence. We understand that we now have Sohini Bhattacharya, CEO Breakthrough, who is in the room, and then hopefully we'll be able to go to Marie as well. Again, engaging activists and people at the front line in different organizations trying to combat gender-based violence during this session. Sohini, thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope you can hear us well as well. Okay. I have a question for you, Sohini. I think I'll just really read it quickly and then allow you to get into it. What needs to happen to shift this gender norms so that all women and girls reach their full potential, which is so critical? Over to you, Sohini.
For breakthrough, preventing gender-based violence depends on transformation of gender norms. For that, these things are crucial. Building agency of young people to ask difficult questions around hard-to-shift norms. Building leadership of a generation of young gender champions to take action in their own lives and in society. Working with community stakeholders to challenge behaviors that perpetuate discrimination and violence against women and girls so that communities learn to love and value them for who they are. This needs to be done in an intersectional and systemic way. The processes, actions, and outcomes must be grounded in the understanding that different forms and systems of inequalities are experienced in different ways by women, girls, and gender diverse people, and that these experiences are rooted in systems and structures of power. This is crucial. Breakthrough commits to reach and influence 2 million young people across India, inclusive trade, curriculum, and multimedia campaigns with the goal of shifting individual behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, and introducing a new cultural norm in which all people take responsibility for the prevention of gender-based discrimination and violence. We will center voices of young people of all genders in decision-making, not just about their own lives and opportunities, but about violence, about diversity and inclusion, education, climate change, and economic sustainability. We'll invest in building their leadership and provide them with forms to take action. This will also need strategic partnership with government officials to address their views around patriarchy so that everyone reaches the same gender equitable views. And we'll need winning coalitions with other CEOs that will bring structural changes together with the cultural change so both can surge forward. And we need resources, patient, core, long-term, flexible resources that are designed for real change to happen. This forum has done a lot to bring everyone together and open up spaces with unlikely partners, yet many remain outside of these processes. Can we bring all of them into the journey of transformation that begins after the Paris Forum? The truth is, gender-based violence intersects with the largest development in the world, and unless we end it globally, we won't achieve at least 11 of the 7 Sustainable Development Goals. So in the run-up to the next crucial 10 years to 2030, we might find spaces of convergence across issues and sectors, and we must build accountability for everyone to respond to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sohini, for talking about partnering with CEOs and governments, really a multi-stakeholder approach. And more than that, reminding us that 2030 is literally around the corner. So how are we going to scale progress and accountability, inclusivity to that point, including and even including young people of all genders into policy making and into the decisions that ultimately affect their lives. So thank you so much for that. That's me, Bhattacharya, CEO of Breakthrough. And now we're going to welcome Marie-Claire. Of course, again, we've had her earlier. Marie, thank you for being with us and for your patience. I had to let out a little giggle there because your patience
I hope so.
Beyond. Thank you. All right. So, Marie, if I can ask you the question I asked you earlier on, which was about the caring group pioneering in combating violence and supporting survivors for the last 13 years through its foundation, and how you will strengthen action to accelerate progress against GBV.
Merci Janet. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, chers champions de la coalition d'action. C'est un grand honneur pour Kérine d'être champion aux côtés des gouvernements, des associations de femmes et de jeunes, des organisations internationales et des fondations afin de catalyser l'action collective. Les échanges au sein de cette coalition d'action ont été extrêmement riches et je suis très heureuse de partager avec vous aujourd'hui les engagements concrets que nous prenons pour mettre fin à la violence fondée sur le genre à l'égard des femmes et des filles dans toute leur diversité. Comme vous l'avez évoqué, Janet, le groupe Kering, qui rassemble des maisons emblématiques dans le luxe, la joaillerie et l'horlogerie, est engagé de longue date pour l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes, et en particulier dans la lutte contre les violences. Depuis 2008, la Fondation Kering lutte contre les violences faites aux femmes aux côtés d'associations féministes en agissant à 3 niveaux. En soutenant les femmes victimes, en déployant des programmes de prévention avec les plus jeunes et en mobilisant son réseau. Nous allons donc renforcer nos engagements sur les 4 actions définies par la coalition. Évidemment, en complément des actions de prévention et de notre association, de notre soutien aux associations de femmes, j'aimerais m'arrêter sur 2 engagements en particulier. En tant qu'entreprise engagée contre les violences, nous renforcerons nos engagements au sein du groupe et des marques et déploierons notre politique interne sur les violences conjugales en formant un nombre croissant de collaborateurs. Nous continuerons notre offre de premier plan dans l'engagement d'autres parties prenantes et je suis très fière d'annoncer qu'avec le réseau One in Three Women que nous avons cofondé avec FAS, nous nous engageons collectivement avec Florian, L'Oréal et BNP Paribas à convaincre d'ici 2026 50 organisations du secteur privé pour adopter et mettre en œuvre des dispositifs internes pour lutter contre les violences faites aux femmes. Nous sommes également partie prenante de l'engagement collectif au niveau de notre coalition sur les violences et le harcèlement dans le monde du travail et la ratification de la conversion, pardon d'être un peu technique, C190 de l'OIT. Depuis 2008, l'accompagnement des femmes, nous avons accompagné les femmes survivantes dans toute leur diversité et ça a été au cœur de notre démarche. Et nous savons comme il est crucial d'avoir accès à des services complets, accessibles et de qualité pour pouvoir sortir de la violence et se reconstruire. La Fondation Kering augmente son soutien au collectif Restart et à la duplication du modèle impactant de la Maison des femmes qu'elle accompagne depuis sa création en 2016. Ces lieux offrent aux survivantes une prise en charge pluridisciplinaire unique sur tous les types de violences, y compris les mutilations sexuelles féminines, et doivent aujourd'hui, et c'est un point qui est particulièrement important, intégrer les violences faites aux enfants, co-victimes à part entière. Un budget d'environ 6 millions de dollars pour soutenir 15 millions sur 5 ans est attribué afin d'accompagner ce déploiement en appui du gouvernement français. Au-delà de ce soutien en France, nous allons continuer à accompagner les associations de femmes qui luttent contre les violences avec un engagement confirmé à hauteur de 2 millions de dollars. Au total, à travers ces différents engagements, le groupe Kering, via sa fondation, injectera 9 millions de dollars. Le forum Génération Égalité est un point d'orgue exceptionnel, c'est un moment décisif. Et pour François-Henri Pinault, président et directeur général du groupe Kering, il est vraiment important d'utiliser ce moment pour continuer à avancer tous ensemble et convaincre d'autres acteurs pour aboutir à un vrai changement. Nous sommes convaincus que tous ensemble, nous pourrons répondre à cette urgence et à cette vraie urgence d'éradiquer la violence basée sur le genre. Merci pour votre attention et nous allons œuvrer ensemble. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for that, Marie-Claire. I think, I suppose this is when we say putting your money where your mouth is, which is exactly what you've done, committing specific numbers and amounts of money to addressing gender-based violence. And we've heard about it so far at the grassroots level, in the home, and through Marie-Claire talking about the private sector. And one important thing she said is making sure that organizations in the private sector adopt internal provisions to fight GBV. By 2026, 56 organizations to do that. And now we have Areka Safrani, who is the president of European Women's Lobby. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. What are the EWL's commitments on violence against women and girls and plan to implement them?
Thank you very much for your question. As co-leader of this action coalition, the European Women's Lobby has worked tirelessly with other co-leaders to formulate ambitious and game-changing targets and actions to fight male violence against women and girls. As the largest umbrella organization of women's organizations in Europe, our commitments in the Action Coalition are focused on Europe and the European Union. They aim to ensure we walk the talk in creating a world where women are free from violence and the fear of it. Our first commitment will be to strongly advocate for the adoption of legislation and policy dedicating to preventing and combating gender-based violence against all women and girls. We will do this through mobilizing our members and partners to advocate for the ratification, implementation and monitoring of national and regional instruments like the Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention, and through advocating for the adoption of a comprehensive EU directive on all forms of violence against women and girls, with the recognition of violence against women and girls as a serious Eurocrime. Our second commitment is to develop and promote materials on feminist sexuality education. We commit to disseminate these materials through our members and partners and to the relevant institutions at the national and international European level. We want to ensure the inclusion, strengthening, promotion and mainstreaming of feminist principles at all levels of education throughout the EU. Our last but not least individual commitment is about advocating for the increased recognition of the vital contribution and indispensability of women's rights organizations and the essential services that they provide. They need to be part of all relevant decision-making processes, and they need increased financial resources, especially in the current health crisis. We will engage with European governments, EU institutions, funders and all relevant actors to ensure that their instrumental role in the fight against violence against women and girls and beyond is recognized, valued and supported. In addition, we are thrilled to join a collective commitment together with the colleagues of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence and the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights to socialize and advocate for the ratification and implementation of the ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. To conclude, I would like to thank UN Women, the governments of France and Mexico, and all the organizers of the forum for the time, energy, and dedication put in ensuring celebrations of the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. We know we still have lots of work to do, but that together we can advance women's rights in the world.
Thank you so much for that, Rika. Yes, a lot of work to do, but together we can advance women's rights. Thank you as well for your commitment and for playing your part in trying to address gender-based violence. We thank you for your contributions. We're going to continue on with our group of speakers because we are really looking at commitments that are tangible, that are going to be followed through, and that are results-oriented. And that's essentially what this session is today. So far we've really heard from such a wide array of individuals from across different sectors. As I mentioned moments ago, whether it's at the grassroots level, youth activists, private sector, government as well. And so we continue on because it's important. And I hope you're taking notes. If you're watching, if you're live streaming, remember that this is also on you, to hold leaders accountable, to continue to lend your voice in this fight against gender-based violence as well. So next up, I'd like to introduce Sunita Dar, Senior Advisor of Jagori, on inclusive and safe spaces and cities for women and girls. I hope Sunita is able to hear me well. If you are Sunita, I'd like to ask you this question. In talking about the pandemic, If you can hear me, Sunita, maybe you can give me a thumbs up as I proceed to read your question, just so that we're sure that we're engaging with you. I don't know that I can hear you, Sunita. If you'll allow me a moment to confirm whether we're all able to hear you. Are you able to turn on your microphone, Sunita? Unless it's just me, the team will let me know if we are able to hear Sunita. If we are, okay, unfortunately, we are unable to hear Sunita. I'm hoping that we can come back to her and hear from her about some of the important work that she's also doing. Sunita, apologies, and hope we can connect with you again shortly. We will now move on to Jessica Stern. And Jessica Stern is the Executive Director for Outright Action International. Jessica, if you can hear me, the question to you is about global LGBTIQ rights and feminist organizations being a strong focus on the intersectionality of the GBV Action Coalition leadership. Tell us, as well as a leader of the GBV Action Coalition, what kind of commitments is Outright making in order to bring intersectional lenses to feminist spaces and put the LGBTI communities in the center of preventing and combating GBV work? Jessica, hope you were able to hear me as well.
I heard you perfectly. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Thank you so much.
Oh. Well, let me just tell you, you were the most incredible moderator. So thank you for convening this session so elegantly.
Thank you.
There's a little bit of feedback on my line, so I'm going to hope that no one else can hear it. It is quite distracting though, so let me try taking out one of my AirPods.
Okay, take your time till you're comfortable.
All right, thank you. I'll go ahead. As a global feminist organization fighting for the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people worldwide, we at Outright have a clear-eyed vision of how to achieve gender equality. We know this because although we have far to go, the LGBTI global movement has achieved enormous progress in a relatively short time. And much of that progress has been made possible by working in solidarity with the global women's rights movement. So I come into this conversation today with hope. And I also come in inviting everyone to join us about who is usually left behind in gender-based violence interventions. And here I'm specifically asking governments, the private sector, UN agencies, and even civil society to do more. There's no question that GBV programs are under-resourced, unacceptably, for women and girls, but there's more. Lesbian, bisexual, trans, intersex, and non-binary people must be explicitly included in the work of the Generation Equality Forum. Too often, they're not seen as priorities in gender-based violence programs, despite being overrepresented among those targeted. And some of us are not even seen as real women. We also must recognize the heightened vulnerability to gender-based violence experienced by people living with disabilities, people of color, those in rural communities, those living in poverty, and sex workers worldwide. Intersectionality is the only way we will succeed. Let me give you some examples of what's at stake in the relationship between gender-based violence and LGBTI people. I'm talking about human rights violations such as forced marriage, so-called conversion therapy, so-called corrective rape, domestic violence, honor crimes, arbitrary arrest, custodial abuse, and the unimaginably high rates of killings of LGBTIQ people by loved ones, strangers, and law enforcement simply because of who they are. And because of the gravity of these issues, Outright has made 3 commitments in our work to end gender-based violence, in addition to a plethora of commitments in coalition with amazing colleague organizations. But in the interest of time, I'll focus on our 3 primary commitments with you today and invite you to follow up with us at Outright if you want to hear more. 1, Outright commits to conduct research and advocacy designed to end conversion practices, sometimes known as conversion therapy, though it's neither conversion nor therapy, but torture. Outright will create new legal, faith-based, human rights, and health-based resources and pathways for dismantling the system of state and non-state actors that permits conversion practices. 2, Outright commits to establish a regional network of experts in Asia to strengthen national initiatives working at the intersections of gender-based violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and sex characteristics. The network will foster learning exchanges, develop a regional information hub on best practices, create new training resources, advocate for legal and policy reform, and showcase inclusive and effective programs and services on gender-based violence. And third, Outright commits to advocate for laws and policies in the Caribbean that will help end the cycle of gender-based violence. And we'll do this by specifically targeting sodomy laws, the lack of gender identity recognition, and unequal or inadequate laws on sexual or domestic violence. I'd like to draw to an end by going back to where I started, with hope. We will achieve gender equality one day, and the way we will do it is by including all people who experience gender-based violence or discrimination on the basis of harmful gender norms. There is no question that this is absolutely a fight for women's rights, and this is also more than a fight for women's rights. This is a fight to dismantle the system of patriarchy that holds all of us back. Outright is proud to be a leader of the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition. It's time to invest in this agenda and count on us to fight.
Okay. Jessica, thank you so much for those very, very succinct call to action, very clear, and for all the work you're doing in terms of the LGBTIQ movement. And Jessica mentioned, among other things, that first of all, she comes with hope. And she says, other than a lot of what else that she's mentioned, research to address and end conversion therapy, actually said and articulated is more torture than therapy. Learning exchanges, training resources, legal and policy reforms to protect members of the LGBTIQ movement, and that in order to address gender equality, everyone needs to be included. One powerful line that is said over and over again is that when everyone is included, everyone wins. And so thank you again, Jessica Stern, Executive Director of Outright Action. We will now bring back Sunita Dar, I think in the waiting room. Sunita, I know we were not able to hear you earlier. Let's give Sunita a moment to as we continue to speak to our organizations and partners throughout this action session, which I think is just truly monumental. I think many, many years ago, the gender equality didn't look or sound anything like this. And that's powerful about, going through different generations and reacting to issues that are happening in the lives of people, very commitments, very fresh commitments, very insightful commitments and thoughts as well, going into how we can address gender equality and end gender-based violence. And so far, a huge thank you to everyone who's come on here and spoken so far, and to those of you sharing your thoughts as well in the chat box. Again, just waiting on Sunita. There we go, Sunita. I hope you can hear me. Allow me to read the question, because I truly hope by now you can hear me and we can hear you too. I'll go through the question and allow you time, Sunita, to respond. The pandemic has given rise to a shadow pandemic, violence against women and there's been a greater focus on domestic violence, more specifically, especially with a lot of the lockdowns around the world. However, we also know that there is a continuum of sexual violence, harassment, discrimination, and exclusion women and girls experience across diverse groups, and it's also continued to occur in public spaces within the city and rural areas throughout this pandemic. And now I'd like to invite you, Sunita, to talk a little bit more about how your organization is trying to address these very public, difficult issues when it comes to gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, and apologies for the delay. I represent the Global Coalition on Inclusive Safe Spaces and Cities for Women and Girls, which comprises of 5 regional and global feminist organizations: Jagori, Huairo Commission, Red Mujer e Habitat Latin America, Safety Pin, and Women in Cities International. We are committed to working with women, girls, trans, and gender non-conforming persons, survivors of violence from the most marginalized communities across multiple intersections of ableism, caste, class, ethnicity, race, religion, and social locations. We work in urban, rural, and humanitarian settings in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We are pledging ourselves to strengthen our ongoing work to prevent, respond to, and end gender-based sexual violence in public spaces. In 20 cities, we would like to enhance the leadership of grassroots and indigenous women's groups to implement and monitor policies of the local authorities, reclaim their voice and representation in local and national governance, and respond to the devastating impacts of the pandemic for those most at risk. In 30 communities, we have committed to supporting women's collectives, diverse collectives, in addressing new and emerging forms of gender-based violence. Online and digital, advocate for legal reforms and social norm changes. We want to invest in leadership, build accountability frameworks, mainstream feminist perspectives, rights, interests into city and municipal plans. In 20 cities, we want to focus on generating evidence, measuring the impacts of physical and spatial interventions for gender-friendly cities, adopting the women's safety audit technology. As well, we shall partner with municipal governments to use grassroots evidence in designing gender-responsive urban safety interventions. In 7 of the Latin American countries, in partnership with 2 local governments in each country, our feminist networks will advocate for the regional framework on women's rights to the city and the regional observatory on gender violence and cities. In challenging structural inequalities, we plan to expand partnerships and networks on safer cities and spaces, ensuring an intergenerational engagement. Co-create and implement inclusive policies to end gender-based violence with the UN and government partners, international agencies, youth collectives, women workers in the informal sector, and historically disadvantaged communities. Our political commitment is to mobilize feminist financing for women's collectives, grassroots groups, to build their second generation of programs and realize rights, freedoms, dignity for all women and girls. Investing into work on inclusive, safe spaces and cities is one of the transformative ways to end gender-based violence. We seek equal and meaningful partnerships. We're very honored to hear the speakers who have dedicated their voice, resources, and funds to support the grassroots empowerment and women's rights. Thank you very much.
So much, Sunita. And as you appreciate all of those who are committing their time and resources, we also appreciate you addressing a very real issue, not just in some of the areas you've mentioned, but around the world: sexual harassment in public spaces, public transport vehicles, is a whole other shadow pandemic that we thank you for mentioning that. We now move on to Asa Regner, Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Thank you for joining us in this session. And I'd like to ask, UN Women, together with the governments of France and Mexico, as hosts of the Generation Equality Forum, have called on the world to commit to concrete, game-changing actions to propel progress. So what game-changing actions are you going to adopt to prevent and respond to gender-based violence against women and girls in all their diversity? And what will UN Women be committing to over the next 5 years?
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for moderating this session so professionally and for so long with such patience and drive. And also, obviously, UN Women, we have to walk the talk, and we have to be good at doing our utmost to live up to both all the trust and confidence that we receive through all the commitments and the hard work of others. And we have to add our own efforts to eliminate violence against women and girls and LGBT people together with all of you. So what we will do, very importantly, of course, is to drive delivery of the blueprint of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence and Violence Against Women and its related targets. We want, together with you, of course, to ensure these concrete results for women and girls in all their diversity by 2026. You know, it's a 5-year period. And we want to mobilize $400 million to lead this transformative action in at least 25 countries to end all forms of gender-based violence against women and girls, including harmful practices. Also, more concretely, everything that we do, and I think that you all represent that and have alluded to, prevention, protection, and justice. And we want more concretely to have results in all of that, and with the blueprint of the Action Coalition that all the leaders have contributed to. We want to galvanize, we want to leverage the whole UN system, and you saw the Secretary General in yesterday's session, and as you know, he's been very active, not least during the COVID year, in appealing to governments to prevent violence, to protect and to find justice during the COVID year, because he feared increased levels of violence, which unfortunately he was also right in. So we want to continue to leverage the whole UN system and its leadership to build on good practices, not least on the UN Spotlight Initiative, and we heard the EU commissioners here before mentioning that, and their pledges in relation to the Spotlight Initiative. We want to scale up programming, we want to ensure effective coordination and accountability mechanisms that you rightly pointed out. This is almost the most important thing. We also, as I said, want to step up groundbreaking evidence-based prevention strategies. That is lacking to a large extent in the world. We know that. But we also know that we have knowledge around that. We know nowadays what works. And we have the respect framework that we heard about before, which we want to be guided by. And as we know, mostly when we talk about violence against women, gender-based violence, violence against LGBTI persons, men are perpetrators. Not always, but in the great majority of cases. And we have to address men and boys in this work in order to change patriarchy, to change thinking around patriarchy, to change behaviors which increase violence. We have to reverse those trends. Also, we need, as I said, to strengthen instruments for justice, stop impunity, and we will do that, as one example, through gender-responsive policing. And another example is the use of innovative technologies, all of this according to the blueprint of the Action Coalition. We need, of course, high-quality investigations, which is another part of this work. We also, in order to do all of this and be guided by and to support our results, we need to amplify the support and funding to women's rights organizations. And we want to do that by working with partners to secure a minimum of $100 million in grants through the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women. And also, very importantly, all of you know that, to represent these organizations, increase the proportion of core and flexible funding so that we can make the other monies work. We also know that during COVID, many of our sisters and brothers within these organizations experience even more of shrinking space and harassment and violence against themselves for protecting and advocating for protection and rights for women and girls. This is very urgent. Also, we want to scale up safe cities for women and girls that we've heard a lot about in this seminar, to help, together with all of you, create safe, empowering public spaces free of sexual harassment in 50 additional cities, and strengthen action to end sexual harassment, exploitation and abuse in other settings. And there will be a special session on this too later today. Also, very importantly, violence can also be committed through digital solutions, and it is being so on a daily basis. Also, harassment, threats, sexual abuse can be performed through digitalization. Tech can also constitute solutions to many of these problems, make women connect and create safe spaces for women. We want to work with digitalization, both to prevent violence and crime and to make it work in favor of rights for women and girls and against violence against women, again, both for prevention, protection and to stop impunity. So I thank you, everybody, for contributing, and I really look forward to working with all of you and the colleagues at UN Women to really safeguard that accountability that is so important to get this to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. The Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, also Regna, talking about an evidence-based prevention strategy among many other important elements of the fight against gender-based violence, and mobilizing millions of US dollars to end all forms of gender-based violence, a commitment that she's making on behalf of all the UN Women. So thank you so much for that. Shortly, we'll be going into a panel session that will begin to mark the end of this session. But before that, I'd like to invite Emma Rayleigh, who I'm made to understand is standing by to share her thoughts. Emma is a young feminist activist, project coordinator at the Brussels Binder and board member at 50. Again, sharing the purpose and passion and power of young voices and young activists in the fight against gender-based violence. We're back in. Do we have Emma, or should we perhaps either take a video break or go to the panel discussion as I wait to get advice on that? Again, just recapping what a powerful, incredible, perhaps a little chaotic couple of hours it's been, but really special. Despite some of the glitches we may be experiencing, there is still so much heart in what a lot of people are saying and committing to. I think we are now going to go towards Emma. I believe Emma is standing by. If not, we'll be able to go to Josina. I understand Josina Michelle is standing by. Josina, if you're able to hear me, Josina is in the civil society, another very, very critical arm, really the amplifiers of this forum in addressing gender-based violence. Josina, if you can hear me, as I'm being told to go to Josina, you can hear me. Thank you so much, Josina, for joining us on this forum. And you know why? It's so important to have your voice included in this as a survivor. This really speaks to you and millions of girls and women. So we may be talking about numbers, but behind those numbers are people, people like yourself. And so I think the question for you, Josina, is we hear about these commitments and we hear about what it is that leaders are saying, but how does it really relate to the millions of girls and women are affected by gender-based violence?
Hi, thank you for having me. You know, we're almost 26 years after the Beijing commitments, the Beijing conference, and the realities in which women live have changed. To a tiny majority, it has gotten better, but to a tiny minority, it has gotten better. But to the majority of people, of women in this world, it has not. We looked specifically at the case of gender-based violence. Yes, it's true that many more countries have policies, they have rules when it comes to gender-based violence. But it's also very true that many of us, as survivors of gender-based violence, still see justice as elusive. Just to give you an example, yes, we are able to talk about gender-based violence, to discuss and to report it perhaps much better than it was a few years ago. But with that, we still, whenever a woman decides to speak out, to go and seek justice, she also then increases the level of danger, of insecurity, and lack of protection, both at the societal level and also at an institutional level. And then, of course, we have the issue of legislation. It's easier for states to say, well, we've passed the legislation, there's so many years for perpetrators of violence, but the reality is the numbers still show that out of the women that come out to actually seek justice, very few of them actually get to see justice. And the numbers also show that the number of persecutions of abusers, perpetrators of violence is still below 10%. So those are the kind of things that we need to look. But with these commitments, of course, first is for us as society, as state, as different other organizations, to relook at what was not done and say, okay, where do we pick up from here? Because there is no use to make new commitments if the old ones, which are supposed to be our foundation, then have not yet come into, have not actually been achieved. So it's important to make new commitments, but also look back and say what was not achieved, how do we actually build from there? These kind of stakeholder commitments, of course, bring out together, are able to bring joint commitments between different organizations, different groups in society, and that there are no silos. No one works in silence. So it's important to bring philanthropists, it's important to bring the church, it's important to bring custodians of culture, it's important to bring governments and civil society, and all those to sit and plan together, because you then understand what kind of situation you're dealing with and how you're going to plan. In it, I need to say that whenever we're planning for programs around gender-based violence, it is imperative to bring the voice of survivors, because only Maria, only Josina, only Petra are able to say,
we're slowly
yes,
running out of time. Sincere apologies. Thank you so much.
When my two other,
I know Josina was waiting to make those comments, and as a survivor, it's extremely critical. We may have to move on to the next segment. Thank you so much, Josina, for all the work you do. Josina Michelle, our founder, Kuluka Movement Director, her life. Thank you again for your incredible voice and everything you do. We now have a commitment maker video that we want to go into. We are really running out of time, hoping it will come back to us. If not, perhaps we will see you again on the other side of the forum. For now, let's go over to the commitment makers videos before we completely wind up.
Dear President Macron, Madam Under Secretary General Mlambangukka, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a big honor and privilege to speak at the Generation Equality Forum. I thank the leadership of France, Mexico, and the United Nations for organizing this timely and crucial event. Over the 30 years of independence, Kazakhstan was implementing progressive, women-oriented policies. We have established a robust legal framework topped by the concept of family and gender policy until 2030. Last month, I signed a decree on further human rights measures with gender equality as one of its major focus areas. Kazakhstan also promotes gender issues as a foreign policy priority in the regional dimension. COVID-19 is an enormous challenge, but also an opportunity to transform existing social and economic models towards ensuring gender equality and inclusion. That's why Kazakhstan has proudly joined 2 action coalitions on gender-based violence and economic justice and rights. Today, I make the following commitments on behalf of Kazakhstan. At the policy level, we will launch the nationwide study on prevalence of violence against women and girls. At the program level, I initiate the Central Asian Regional Knowledge Platform for sharing state-of-the-art gender empowerment, violence prevention and response expertise. At the financial level, we are ready to contribute to the UN and EU-led Spotlight Initiative's regional program for Central Asia and Afghanistan. To expand access to financial and other support for female entrepreneurs, we will establish special resource centers throughout Kazakhstan. At the legislative level, we will revise the list of women-restricted hazardous jobs, as well as enhance social and legal support for women and children. To conclude, I confirm my strong commitment to the noble cause of women's equality, safety, and empowerment. Thank you for your attention.
It's an honour to be speaking with you today as Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Women. In coming together for the Generation Equality Forum, we are building on the historical commitments we made together in Beijing 26 years ago and looking together at how we can redouble our efforts to secure the fundamental rights of all women and girls. Australia's commitment to the Generation Equality Forum includes our strong support for the Gender-Based Violence Action Coalition in a number of major steps that we are taking to tackle gender-based violence, both domestically and in our region. We are creating a second Australian national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. We committed over $1 billion in our latest federal budget to improve women's safety. This will fund measures focused on preventing violence before it begins, delivering frontline and response services, providing financial support for women leaving a violent relationship, understanding the issues through data collection and monitoring, and expanding responses through our justice system. It also includes increased support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and children, measures to improve the online environment for women and children, and support for women from diverse communities. We are also funding national women's alliances to provide advice to policymakers on all issues affecting women and to inform the development of effective and innovative policy solutions. In the Indo-Pacific region, we're providing $1.3 billion through Australia's overseas development assistance programs to support gender equality. This includes increased funding for targeted gender equality initiatives focused on women's leadership, safety, health and economic empowerment to be delivered in partnership with the Pacific community. I'd like to take the opportunity to congratulate UN Women and the governments of France and Mexico for co-leading this historic process. In partnership with you, Australia is resolutely committed to the values of respect, dignity, choice, equality and justice for all women and girls. Thank you.
Il y a 25 ans, nous nous sommes engagés à prendre des mesures audacieuses.
25 years ago, we committed to very bold measures towards gender equality. But we've made progress, and no country has really implemented the Beijing program. And Belgium looks forward to this historic possibility today to renew our commitment and to make human rights a reality for all women and girls. Fighting violence and gender-based violence will remain a priority for Belgium. The pandemic has increased sexual violence, intimidation, harassment online and others. As commitment maker in this coalition, Belgium would reinforce the measures by elaborating a sixth national action plan against gender-based violence and the Istanbul Convention, with a national plan for women security. Belgium will also reinforce the normative framework through ratifying the 190 Convention of the ILO to do away with harassing in work. This is essential, and it will be the case for Belgium in the National Action Plan against human trafficking or in the new humanitarian strategy. Of course, we all know to what extent financing remains necessary, so Belgium will carry on supporting its commitment towards UNFPA and UNICEF. And I would like to pay tribute to the work carried out by civil society and the human rights defenders, because they play an essential role in the progress made and is worth our full support. Thank you.
During COVID-19 pandemic, we took over the role of first-line responders and mediators between women victims of violence and institutions in the system of protection from violence.
We are first responders even in conflict situations, standing at the forefront, supporting women and girls facing complex challenges during COVID-19 confinement.
During the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, UNAB provided phone call-based psychosocial support to girls and women with disabilities victims of violence to ensure their safety, referral, and access to support services during the lockdown.
Women for Afghan Women Organization provided hundreds of women and children of incarcerated mothers with shelter, legal services, counseling, health services.
We provided emergency funding. We paid rent and utilities for some of our beneficiaries. We organized online trainings and workshops on psychological resilience and well-being. And we also supported small businesses run by women and affected by COVID-19.
International Aid has supported local organizations, Kamfuri and Farodis, to maintain their centers for vulnerable women and girls, including those with disability and survivors of domestic violence, to access free shelter, legal and psychological support.
Durante la pandemia por COVID-19, desde Andes, focalizamos nuestro trabajo monitoreando las respuestas del Estado a la hora de transversalizar las perspectivas de género en las respuestas para el acceso a derechos básicos de mujeres, lesbianas, travestis y trans, especialmente de grupos de mujeres migrantes y de pueblos originarios de Tucumán y de Jujuy al norte de Argentina.
Empowering Women for Excellence Initiative was able to provide legal counsel to our project partner to target community members, including primary and secondary beneficiaries on domestic violence cases during the COVID-19 lockdown.
We support more than 500 women who use drugs and sex work in response to the COVID-19 outbreak.
In March and April 2020 alone, Women for Women Vasan provided 285 counseling sessions by telephone to survivors of violence.
Japan 日本国政府を代表し、国連女性機関やフランス政府をはじめ、本会合の開催に向けて献身的な努力をされたすべての関係者の皆様に心から感謝を申し上げます。ジェンダー平等は日本国政府の重要で確固たる方針です。グテーレス国連事務総長の女性と女児をコロナ対応の中心にとのメッセージを強く支持いたします。先日の G7 コーンウォールサミットで日本の菅総理をはじめ G7 の各国首脳はジェンダーに基づく暴力の根絶にコミットすることを表明しました。日本は北京プラス25の記念すべき昨年に北京宣言を踏まえて作成された基本法に基づき新たな国内計画を策定しました。コロナ禍で DV や性暴力の増加、深刻化などが懸念される中、日本はこの計画に基づき被害者に対する SNS 相談や24時間対応の電話相談を充実させています。また、ワンストップ支援センターの拡大、NPO が運営するシェルターの取り組み支援を進めています。また、コロナの影響を受けた途上国の女性への支援として、国連女性機関、紛争下の性的暴力担当国連事務総長特別代表事務所、紛争関連の性的暴力生存者のためのグローバル基金の3組織に対して総額約3540万ドルを拠出しています。これらの支援はジェンダーに基づく暴力の防止対策にも活用されています。女性と女児のために尽力をされているすべての方々に心からの敬意を表しますとともに、皆さんと共にジェンダー平等の実現に向けて全力で取り組んでいくことをお誓い申し上げます。
Hi, I'm Rick Daams, President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We have failed women for far too long. It is time to reinvigorate our commitment to end violence against women. The Gender Equality Forum and its coalition on gender-based violence will provide us with a roadmap to do so. Action means strong political commitment, making available resources needed, and effectively implementing legally binding treaties which hold the state responsible for acts of violence against women. The Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, the so-called Istanbul Convention, is the most effective and ambitious international human rights treaty in this regard. Its positive impact since its adoption in 2011 is impressive, garnering public attention to the urgent need to take action. Important changes to domestic laws and policies, more shelters and services for women, victims of violence, and breaking taboos surrounding sexual violence, specifically including rape. As law and policy makers, it is our duty to ratify international and regional human rights instruments, including the Istanbul Convention, and hold governments accountable for implementing the standards they have subscribed to. So together, let's step up our work and keep women and girls safe from violence.
Dear President Macron, Excellencies, the government of the Republic of Cyprus fully supports all efforts undertaken within the Generation Equality Forum, and with this opportunity, I would like to congratulate France, Mexico, and UN Women for undertaking this significant initiative. To safeguard women's rights, we need collective action. The responsibility for promotion of women's rights rests with all states, and therefore effective action should also be undertaken multilaterally. The Generation Equality Forum provides us with this exact opportunity. It is very well known that as long as women and girls fall victims of any form of violence, equality cannot be achieved. Towards this direction, Cyprus has signed and ratified the Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. Very recently, the House of Representatives has voted for a comprehensive legislation criminalizing all forms of violence against women. In order to accelerate this process, our commitments focus on targeted actions to combat gender-based violence. This includes the protection of victims by ensuring that legal frameworks are implemented and for survivors to safely access comprehensive support services based on our continued political will and accountability. In wishing you the most productive deliberations during this important and timely forum, allow me to reiterate my readiness, as well as that of my government, to continue supporting your efforts towards eliminating any remaining gender inequalities and any form of discrimination against women. Thank you.
My name is Rhoda. I am 18 years old and I am a member of the Working Group on Girls Equality Forum that I attended. I was part of the gender-based violence group, and one of the girls from India talked about how in one of the communities, when a girl is on their period, they send them to a shed, and basically when they go to that shed, they get bitten by a snake and they die. And these are some of the things that we want to debunk by mobilizing young men and women, bringing them together as well, and educating them, and also being able to uplift the voices of those who have been silenced and stigmatized and shamed. Even though the world is changing and science is changing the world, there's no way for us to see how girls are being included in the Action Coalition. And in just the recent local conversation circles that I attended, all the girls agreed on how we don't see young girls and women being included in the Action Coalition, and this is what we also want to see a change in. We want more girls to be included, especially when it comes to where the final decisions are being made. We have no way of knowing whether what we are saying is going to be really taken seriously and taken into consideration, and we want crimes against women and issues that are affecting us to be really taken into consideration. And it is the implementation that really matters to us the most, because if all of this isn't implemented, then it's like all our actions are in vain. In the next 5 years, we want to see real change, and we hope that our concerns and our needs will be addressed with critical and immediate action. Thank you.
La pleine égalité des sexes demeure l'objectif principal de mon
Full equality between genders is the main objective of our country, but the challenge is huge, namely in armed conflicts, because they exacerbate gender violence crimes. COVID-19 is at the origin of the worsening of violence, and it has made it more difficult to have access to justice because of the multiplicity of expenses, non-denunciation of crimes by their perpetrators for fear of reprisals, and socio-cultural stigmatization and complicity of the families of victims. However, the commitment of the DRC to put an end to this scourge is very firm. Indeed, gender-based violence and crimes of gender-based violence are the essential element for long-lasting peace in our country. This is a compromise for the well-being of women, and that's why the RDC has decidedly committed to reverse the curve of impunity. And the efforts taken up are focused on the improvement of the legal framework and the improvement of the criminal code, the code of criminal procedure in Congo, and the code of family law. The drafting and the adoption of the National Kampala Declaration, the adoption of a national action plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325 of the UN Security Council, the implementation and of the revision of the National Strategy for Fighting Gender-Based Violence, the implementation of an approach for taking care or holistic caretaking of people who have suffered gender-based violences with multi-sectorial services. In the proclamation of the state of siege in Kivu and Ituri in order to secure peace and to put an end to gender-based violences against women as a weapon of war. The automation of women, which is one of the pillars in our government, translates the government's desire to allow women to gain independence. The launching of the Zero Tolerance campaign is an immediate campaign against gender-based violence. And for 2 years, between 2021 to 2023, the DRC will raise awareness among its people and will implement strategies and mechanisms to put an end to gender-based violence. It's here now the best opportunity for me to renew the invitation of the President of the Republic, Félix Antoine Tshisekedi, to all of our partners to provide the necessary support so that together we can make DRC a model country in fighting gender-based violence. I thank you for your attention.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to take part in the Generation Equality Forum under the leadership of UN Women and in collaboration with the governments of France and Mexico. In this forum, the Italian government officially introduces its commitment to prevent and combat violence against women and girls. The pandemic has made even more evident the need to take action effectively and concretely since the cases of violence have been growing over the last year. Countering violence against women is also a core issue for women's empowerment, removing women from situations of oppression and supporting victims in their recovery. Safeguarding women and girls from violence and promoting gender equality is also a priority along the lines of the humanitarian action of the Italian cooperation. At the international level, we intensify our efforts to support UN agencies through voluntary core contributions to end child marriage and countering female genital mutilation. In the framework towards the adoption of the new Italian National Strategic Plan, the Italian government will commit for a series of actions concerning Action Coalition 1 dedicated to gender-based violence. We will improve interventions to prevent and counter gender-based violence through strengthening the network of anti-violence centers and shelters, training operators in charge for a dedicated assistance and protections of victims, punishment against perpetrators. Within this context, recent new measures will be monitored, such as the Income of Liberty and the Microcredit of Liberty, to support women and encourage their autonomous reintegration into social life while countering economic dependence from their partner. Involvement of all concerned public and private actors and stakeholders will be encouraged to ensure a strong and comprehensive countering action against violence. The issue of gender-based violence will be discussed also on the occasion of the G20 Ministerial Conference on Women's Empowerment to be held on the next August. Policies against violence are needed, and a comprehensive approach is the solution. preventing, protecting, and punishing as the Istanbul Convention states. So, within the Action Coalition, Italy is open to exchange experiences and solutions with fellow countries and the stakeholders to strengthen global action. Thank you.